Maybe don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build, 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 this time power, this time to build power, this time to build power, this time to build power.
What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Chris Hampton.
And this is Nate Drolet.
Dude, how are things? It's been a minute since we chatted.
Yeah, things have been good. It's like full summer here in Salt Lake.
Mm-hmm.
I started a sport climbing program. I'm
Nice.
in week 2 of it. It's terrible. Endurance training is so awful.
Oh my God, it's so bad, especially when you've like let it slip a little. It's
let it
being
slip a
pumped
lot.
is so uncomfortable when you're not in that zone regularly.
Yeah, it's just everything. I mean, this is the first time I was thinking about it. I think this is the first time I've trained endurance indoors in like 7 years. Just because otherwise I'd be like, oh, I'll just go outside and like sport climb enough to kind of build fitness. And that's what I did for a long time. You know, it was a long time ago when I was really like doing endurance work indoors. And just like my skin hurts, my feet hurt. It's terrible. So yeah, but it's good. I'm getting it done. I'm actually doing like a modified version of the Climb 512 program.
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool, actually. Like, a lot of people just want to jump straight to, like, you know, oh, well, I've done 12C, so I'm going to do Climb 514.
Yeah.
You know? And these things are built with really specific things in mind. And Climb 512 is like more aerobic fitness and like getting comfortable in the pump and in that discomfort. So it's probably a good starting point for reintroducing that kind of work.
Yeah, that's like what it seemed like to me. And having been able to see all the programs, I was like, okay, Climb 512 is the most just pure volume fitness program. And everything's based on the grade you climb anyways. Ironically, my modifications is like, oh God, I have to make this like a notch easier for myself. Like, because if I just purely go from, take your top grade -2, you're going to do 36 of those today. It's like, oh no, no, I'm not. Like, I like added in an extra intro week in. That's even easier. Like, but it's good. I'm excited about it. And it's fun because even though I made like a few small tweaks myself, it still feels like it's someone else's program that they wrote. And I'm like, hey, like I can't argue with the invisible person who wrote this. I'm just following the plan.
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. I go back occasionally and follow some of those programs. Like I've done kettlebells for climbers quite a few times actually. And when I do my own strength training, when I program my own strength training, I still never get the same like powerful athletic feel that I get from kettlebells for climbers. Doesn't matter what I do. It ends up being the one that's better for me. And maybe part of it is that I'm sticking to it with fewer variations and I'm just going, okay, Paul Corsaro wrote this and he knows his shit. So this is going to work, you know?
Totally.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've been getting pumped a lot lately and I'm getting more comfortable in that discomfort, like the place where I used to live, you know? Like I loved being pumped. And I don't love it as much, but I am feeling better in it again, which is kind of nice. And it's kind of fun to get really pumped on things again.
One thing I have noticed, because I have been sport climbing outside a decent bit this year, even though the training just started up now. And as I have gotten over this initial hump of like tragically bad fitness, it has become more fun. Like it was really unfun initially, shockingly so, because I was like, I'm gripped all the time, like clip it. I don't know when my power is just going to hit 0. I could be at a clip. I don't know. Yeah. And now it's a little more predictable. It's like, okay, this is starting to be like the performance side is starting to be more enjoyable. Training still trash, but
Yeah, and actually, I find that it's easier for me mentally to train endurance outside, to like do that like final lap in a day, especially if it's on a project and I'm trying to do a big link that I haven't done yet. Um, those sorts of moments are way easier for me to do and feel like they're getting me where I need to be, instead of the sort of really boring, mindless endurance I used to love doing indoors. That stuff is harder for me now,
Hmm.
but such is life. Um, yeah, I've sort of doubled down lately on some really like tiny feet and awkward move, like commitment work, because in the course I'm just finishing up this week. You were in the cohort of folks who took the Atomic Elements course and then got on a call and sort of reiterated or iterated with me, like telling me what all the pain points were and what didn't make sense. And now I'm finishing up all of those updates to it, which has actually been really fun. It
Hmm.
was nice to have a list from people of like, here are the things that didn't quite make sense. And for me to go back and figure out how to say it better, figure out how to format it better, whatever. Um, but while doing that course myself, commitment showed up as like my weak area. And at first I thought, I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
But then as I was going through videos and editing them for the drills, there were like 5 videos in a row where I'm falling off of a move because I'm not committed to it, whether it's bad feet or a weird move that I wasn't quite committed to latching the next hold. I'm just dropping off because of not committing. And I was like, well, fuck, it was right. So now I've been sort of doubling down on that commitment because I'm at 92 513s. I'm trying to get 8 more in the
Oh
next couple
man, you're
months.
there.
I'm almost there. And I'm feeling like if I commit on those first few attempts more, I'll get them done slightly faster, maybe a go faster, maybe 2 goes faster. So that's been my focus lately, which it's been pretty fun to lean into that stuff, like really trying hard to onsite 13A or second go 13A if I don't onsite, and then I'll go into more tactical mode if I need to,
Mhm.
but really giving high efforts, convincing myself quickly to stand on this terrible foot, or do this awkward move when I'm onsiting or whatever. So, yeah, super fun.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. I don't think we've discussed this. So I, went through the course and something really funny happened. When I was filling it out, there was one thing that stuck out that I was like, oh, yeah, this is the thing I am so bad at. And it was one specific question,
Yeah.
and it was under tension.
Mm,
And it's funny because both tension and position, I think I had like 14s out of
mm.
18, something, I forget.
Yeah, I think 18.
Yeah. Both the two highest, and commitment I think was like a 7, which fully resonated. I was like, no, actually, when I see this 100%, it is commitment for me. And it's been fun going through all this endurance work with that in mind. But it's really funny how with tension, it was the one question that I didn't think, oh yeah, no, this is like I have whatever it is, a 4 out of 4, or whatever that high number is.
Yeah.
That was the one thing that I have put a lot of emphasis on in my training to improve. And so it's
Mm,
funny that it's just the tiny little like cutout on arguably one of my greatest strengths is
yeah.
the thing that in my mind that is the big glowing weakness. And it was really like it was just so funny seeing it put in this way and having it just shown to me. I appreciated it. I thought it was kind of comical, but also just very enlightening.
Yeah, for me, it like when I got my results, like I'm sitting there going through the thing, and I totally understand the format because I created it. So I'm sort of understanding what my results are as I'm doing it. But once I colored in my chart, I was like, "Whoa, really?" And at first, I was like, "That can't be right." But then I started really thinking about it, and because it showed commitment and tension as my two weakest areas, and position, effort, and rhythm were my strongest areas. And then I started thinking, you know what? For like the last 5 or 6 years, those are the three things I've been working on.
Yeah.
And I haven't been putting much time into tension and commitment. And then watching the videos, I was like, yeah, I fucking just like lose all tension and go dynamically when a move gets hard, especially. And I was like doing the evaluation for first or second go on a sport route.
Okay.
Like that might be a mini project sort of length, like a 5 to 10 try project, my first or second go. How committed am I? How much tension? Am I finding the right positions? All of that. And it showed commitment and tension to be off. And it's totally true once I started thinking about it, that I either over tension and like over control the move, or if it's a big move, I just like flop my way towards the hold, not really committed, tap it and fall off,
Yeah.
So it definitely shined a light on what I think I need to do to improve.
That's really cool. Man, yeah, I gotta say, and I'm not saying this just to say it, but like I'm super impressed with it. Like with this
Thanks.
course, with this tool. Because this is I mean, we've had a couple conversations, here and in person where it's just like trying to weave through all of this. I mean, and you've had those words written on your whiteboard in the machine shop for years.
Yeah.
I mean, every time I would come by, I'd look at them, you'd have your little like Venn diagrams and all the sketches and, borderline red yarn, like stitching things together. Like we were one step away from there. And I was like, yeah, I don't know where he's going with this. Like I struggled to piece it together, but man, I think you've really like come up with something cool. I've already been telling like all my clients, they're just like, hey, when this comes out, like I want you to do this because I think this is super valuable.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah. I didn't know where I was going with it for a long time. Some things finally clicked into place in this last year. And it was like, okay, now you've got the language to talk about this. You can sort of see where it all connects. And I expect that I'll make updates to this probably yearly, something like that, because I do think it's a really important tool that climbing just doesn't have right now. It's such like talking about improving your movement and your technique is like, it's this super abstract jungle that we're trying to find our way through,
Yeah.
And this is not precise answers by any means, but I do think it gives you a fairly clear direction of where to go with things, which is pretty cool. And I think it will probably be out to the public around the same time that this episode is going out. So
cool.
If you're hearing this, there's probably a link in the show notes for it already.
Nice.
Let's jump into this. This is a different kind of thing. We haven't done this before. This is you and Ravioli Biceps having a conversation, and then I get to like go through it, edit it, put it together as a podcast. And for me, it was really fun listening to for the first time, I guess, because it was like, I am not a video game person, not in this lifetime, not in this life that I'm living now, but in a previous life, I was, way before you guys. Like I had the Atari 2600. I think I had ColecoVision before that. And, I played Atari, and then the very first Nintendos, I had one of the like initial release Nintendos that came with the fucking robot.
Oh, yes.
Came with this weird little robot.
Heard about this.
You played a game called Gyromite with the robot. And very quickly I realized the robot's stupid. I can just do it with my hands, on the controller instead of letting the robot do the controller. So they got rid of that. And that's when Super Mario started coming with Nintendo, was after Gyromite. So, but you start this with a story about me and why I no longer play video games. So, but listening back to it and listening to all of these pieces and then you two relating it back to climbing was really neat and interesting. And I was listening in terms of like, I didn't know if you were going to like point out the parallels to climbing or not. So I started just finding all sorts of parallels to climbing that weren't being mentioned yet.
Ooh.
And then finally you do come back and sort of draw those parallel lines and draw those, like, connect the dots through it. It's such a cool episode. Where did the idea come for this?
It initially kicked off. I mean, I see video game design as just this absolute, I think it's equivalent to coaching in a lot of ways. Because anytime someone creates a game, if they decide, okay, well, here's this new method that I'm going to create, how you're going to interact with this new type of world, you have to teach that to people. Like if you're going to have new mechanics, a new world, all this stuff that you are excited about and you want them to be able to understand, you have to teach it to them. And the way that you teach it is so important, because if you teach it too slow, they'll get bored. Too fast, they'll get overwhelmed. You have to teach everything in ways that it'll stick. You have to make it feel like they're learning it themselves. The more, like, I kind of just, I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it was actually from the book Range. He talked about a video game designer who created the game Stardew Valley 100% by himself, like taught himself color theory, figured out how to make the music, literally everything he did by himself. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating. So I started reading about him, which just led me into more video game design. And it was about at that time that, like pandemic happened, started playing video games a little bit just because, gyms were closed.
Yeah,
and
totally.
it just resonated so much with me. And so it's something that's been on the back burner. And then one day I was messaging with Ravioli because I was playing a new game and I was like, wait, is the benchmark wolf named after this video game? He was like, dude, yes, it is. He was like, wait, are you playing that game? And so we started talking back and forth about it. He was like, okay, he's like, I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but like, keep me updated literally after every boss you beat. And so every time I beat a boss, I'd like message him. He's like, oh my God, but how sick was that? And we'd go back and forth. And then, we were just talking about everything around this, not even just within the game, but just, learning different mechanics and like having basically like mini projects in video games and stuff like that. And he was like, dude, we should record this. This would be a fun thing to talk about. I was like, yeah, absolutely. So
that's really cool. I hadn't made this connection until you just said this, but this whole like ecological approach to practice and coaching that I've been exploring the last couple of years, sort of the main underpinning idea is that the coach is the designer of the practice environment, and you design it in such a way that you let the athlete then explore inside of that environment and they find the correct answer based on the constraints you've put into the environment, which is very much like a video game.
Totally.
You give all of these options for them to try, and hopefully they decide on the correct option, or they never get through this level,
Yeah.
And you have to like nudge them toward the right trapdoor or the right combination of weapons or whatever.
Yeah. That you're absolutely right. And I think that's, I hadn't gone completely down that same rabbit hole, but having seen similar things with coaching, it's kind of like whenever you start writing and then you start appreciating the way people write when you read books. You're like, oh, that's a clever way they tied these things together, which is something that like, if you're just a casual reader, you might not notice. Totally. But it's, it's the skill of writing that once you start to learn it, you see it everywhere and you're like, oh, this is cool. And you have a different appreciation. And yeah, for me, I think it was coming into like revisiting video games as an adult, but with a coach's eye. Suddenly I was like, oh, this is great coaching. It's so clever the way they will do things, and the way they can build nerves and make you want to come back. I don't know, it's super cool. And comically, I think it's made me a better coach and climber.
Yeah, totally. I could see that for sure. Well, I'm not gonna spend too much time talking about this. I'm just going to let people get into this story, but I do want to point out a couple of things in the beginning that I found really interesting, just that were like related to me personally, that weren't discussed, and I hope listeners will do the same. Like, try to find the little personal tie-ins. In fact, if you're a patron or if you just want to message Nate or I or Ravioli, I would love to hear like what people are connecting with in this episode. Like what pieces of talking about video games were you like, oh, that's exactly like climbing. For me, there's a very early on, you two are talking about the story about me having to delete this game that I played. You said 16 hours or something because you were just remembering this story I told you a long time ago. I think it was closer to like 30 hours.
Oh, God.
And I had called in sick to work after playing all night. And then I played all day instead of going to work. And what I needed to do was eat. Like, I realized, fuck, I haven't eaten in over 24 hours. I need to eat some food. And I got up to go get food, and that's when catastrophe happened. But you're talking about that, and Ravioli's relating a similar story, and he says, well, then I went back to, redo that, and I was just in this flow state, and I just cruised through all of these things that took me so many hours to figure out. And for me, that immediately reminded me of my epic on Transworld, having battled through wet holds, and my first time getting through that second crux and onto the head wall, and being sort of thrown off my game right at the last second by these these little puddles in these in-cut crimps that I didn't expect to be there, and then falling at the very last move. I was going to the jug and I fucking fell off.
Yeah.
And that was the last day I got to try it that season because it just got crazy hot. And I spent the whole summer, I very distinctly remember standing in the shower with my head against the wall, I don't know if I'm ever getting on that route again. I basically did it, but I can't check the box. I don't know if I want to go through that anymore,
Yeah.
But then when I did get on it, when I did convince myself to get back on it, it went way faster than I expected it to. It was the early project of my fall, and it just got done. So that reminded me of that experience. And then shortly after that, he mentions you two are talking about coming to final bosses and getting to choose, do I engage or don't I?
Yeah.
Which was a really cool part of the conversation for me. And he talks about the ceremony of some of these bosses, where it's there's this sort of ceremonial moment where it's okay, now we're about to have this test of skills, and still when I'm sport climbing, I take my harness off, put my harness back on, so that I can feel like I'm suiting up for battle.
Yeah.
And it totally reminded me of that. The ceremony of doing that is what prepares me to really try hard, to really commit to this thing.
That's cool. Man, yeah, I'm glad to hear there were some good connections for you.
Yeah, I think it's really neat. So I'm glad you did this. I hope you do more of this kind of thing with people. Very cool conversation. So I'm just going to let people jump into it unless you have something else to say about it.
No.
All right, let's get into it.
It's time to build.
And I don't remember exactly what it was, but he was playing Zelda and just kept playing and had stayed up for, I don't know, some insane amount of time. And then he was like, oh, I need to go to work, and went and hit the power button, but hadn't saved his progress yet. And so he clawed the remote control back to him, was trying to save it with one hand, but it wouldn't save while he was holding the power button. And he had played for I don't know, 16 hours straight or something.
Oh my God. Just the immediate negation of everything that you did, man, all that progress.
Yeah.
Oh man, I have two like deleted save stories that are like make my skin like crawl. One was like a old Final Fantasy VII save that I had on the old like 8 meg memory cards or whatever they were for PS1.
Yeah.
And I had like all my characters like maxed out, 99 Knights of the Round maxed out, all that stuff. And my brother like saved over it, deleted it,
No.
and I was like, "Oh my god!" Yeah, that was bad. And then actually, just recently, because I just got off Graveyard, I when I was still on Graveyard, I was trying to finish up 100%ing Elden Ring. Well, maybe not 100%ing, but like platinum trophying Elden Ring.
Mhm.
And I had my build right. I was like staying up all night playing games. I had done all my other stuff, and I beat a few bosses. I think even like Melania and Malekith, and then just was like, okay, cool. I had been planning to get a PS5, and I was like, all right, I'm going to like save my data to the cloud or whatever, and then so I can like download it once I get the PS5, and then just accidentally downloaded like my old cloud data onto like basically so it just erased all my progress for that entire night. And I think I played for like 5 hours. And I was like, oh my God, I gotta go to bed. And it was one of those where it didn't sink in until I moved from like, are you sure? No, yes, and then hit X as I like, wait, no, that's before the
Oh
timeline. It's just gonna
no.
erase everything I did tonight. And I was like, I'm an idiot.
Oh, dude.
Oh, it was bad. But then I like the next night, it was crazy, dude. I was in a flow state. Like the next night, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do it again. Go have some coffee, whatever. And then I got through all that in like an hour. It was cool. I like first go'd Malekith, and then I think I like first or second go'd Melania. I just had the muscle memory, so I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like, I
Yeah.
had to do it, but it was cool.
Yeah. Dude, it's so cool how that happens. That's like playing Sekiro. I'm on 4th playthrough right now. So
Ooh,
getting the
hell yeah.
final ending. And it's been so, I mean, it's just been fun. Man, I actually had a really interesting encounter with, so did the first playthrough. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. It's incredible. Beat Demon of Hatred, Ishin. And I was
Ooh,
like, sick. Yeah, I was like, this is great. And I was like, yeah, and I want to go do the other bosses. I want to like get everything done, but decided I'd walk away for like 2 weeks. And when I came back, I started playing. And what's funny is initially I was like, I don't think I like this game anymore. Like I was like, I'm just not excited. I was like, I
yeah.
don't want to play. I'm not really that excited. And it actually took me like a little bit. It took me until I beat the Guardian Ape. It was like when you drop into the pit and I started to face him, I was like, oh, I know what this is. I'm not like not having fun. I was nervous because like all those bosses, the whole game was so hard for me
It's
that
so
like I
hard.
think when I started playing it back over, a part of me was like, oh no, what happens if like they're still really hard? I was like, oh, that's what it is. This is just nerves. And then immediately like did a Guardian Ape first try, which
Oh,
was like,
how good
oh,
does that feel? And Guardian Ape
amazing.
was one of the harder ones for me too. There was a couple like skill checks, and I think it's because Guardian Ape is like a big monster. They're almost putting like the Dark Souls giant monster, giant arena feel
Totally.
into like what is up until that point like man versus man combat,
Yes.
and it's all this like sword fighting, and you feel really confident with it, especially after Genichiro. And then they put a big monster in there, and I'm like, oh no, I don't want a big monster. And it just forces you to learn it, and then when you learn it, it's an incredible boss. I have a bunch of my favorite bosses written down, and that's one of them. Especially when you pull that like parasite out of its neck.
Yes.
It's so awesome.
Dude, yeah. That one is so great. It was funny though. I remember the first time I got to it, it was like at the end of a session, I was like, oh, like, you clearly see this giant ape like in the distance. You're
yeah.
you're also at a save point, which is like almost
Yeah.
never a good time. You like look over,
It's-
you see the enemy like 100 yards away from you from the save point. You're like, yeah, this is going to be hard. Sick.
or if you have a save point and then you have like the lead up chamber where they give you a bunch of power ups and like health, like full health, and they give you like a thing and a vendor, and you're like, oh god, this is about to be bad.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's like on a sport climb when if you're trying to onsite something and you go up and you're like, oh, it's 10 bolts long, and every bolt you go up and you haven't hit any difficult climbing yet, you're like, oh god, like the crux just keeps getting harder the further you go. You're like hitting up bolt 9, you're like, I haven't done a single hard move yet. Like this crux is going to be heinous.
Oh yeah, it's going to be just a super defined V8 like in one bolt or something like that.
Yeah. But yeah, so I got to Guardian Ape at like the end of a playing session. I was like, yeah, I'll just like drop in, play him once real quick, see if I can learn the move set, and I'll come back to this in a couple days. Was not prepared, like because he's giant, fast, just like grabs you, ragdolls you. I was like, oh, cool, I'm just dead. And I like just put the controller down, walked away. I was like, I need to have some time to think about this.
Yeah, totally. Sekiro was an interesting one for me too. I think because I played all of them pretty much in order up until Sekiro came out. Not in order. That's wrong. But I played them like consecutive. Like I played a bunch of like FromSoft games in a row leading up to Sekiro. And then I got Sekiro and I was like so excited and was like ready to play. And then I got my ass kicked up and down. Like I think a lot of players did, because they're like, okay, cool. Like I know how to time like the iframes and like how to do like the mechanics and like move around opponents and like the tracking and hitboxes and like the lack of stamina bar and all this other stuff that you're like, wait, what? No, this is all the mechanics I know. And now it's just forcing you to be like really hyper aggressive right in front of the boss and like right in front of like really reading their moveset and reacting. And it took me a long time. I was like, I was like resistant to it. I was like, oh, I can just like, I don't know, kind of use the mechanics that I'd used for Bloodborne or whatever, but you just can't at all. And it's kind of cool. And it ends up making it like my favorite for combat. I think it's like the best combat of all those games.
Yeah. God, the combat's so good. We talked about this briefly, like in texts, but you had said like, you tried to go into it with Bloodborne tactics, but, there was more or less a skill check of just like, hey, that's not going to work here. Like, what was that moment for you?
Yeah, I mean, I played Bloodborne first because I was like, oh, this is really metal. And I love the like Victorian Gothic Yharnam, like H.P. Lovecraft horror style, cosmic horror. And then I was like, wow, this is like an incredible game. Like my favorite game I've played. So satisfying, like played it a bunch. And then I was like, okay, cool. Like there's something to this series. Like I'm coming into it a little bit late, but I was like, I'll just start from like Dark Souls 1, 2, 3. Like, and going from Bloodborne to Dark Souls 1 was also like a skill check, because it's a much slower game. You're kind of going back in time. So you have to adjust, and like it's these really like measured like dodge, reposition, hit, slow. Like it's a lot of like positioning. And then Bloodborne is just like really fast. So I got the same sort of check when I went from Dark Souls. I went from Dark Souls 3, which is I think is my favorite of the series, but we can get into that later. But Dark Souls 3 into Sekiro, and it was like, now I have played 3 games of this like RPG heavy character building, world building. Like you can play whatever style you want. You can have a dex build, a pure strength build, all this stuff, and all these like customizations. And then you get to Sekiro, and it's like extremely linear in a great way. Like it's got all these rules. It's got all these like restrictions on you. I mean, you can't really change the weapon like the whole game. That's like an insane. You go from, dude, I think like Dark Souls 3 has like 200 plus weapons or something crazy like that. I don't even know. But like going from that to 1, and then now they ratchet up the Bloodborne speed even more. It was a huge shock. And that moment where it clicked for me was Genichiro, that first Genichiro fight on top of the pagoda.
Yeah.
the 3-phase fight, and I was like, oh my god, like, wow, I'm just getting my ass kicked over and over and over and over again, and it just kind of beat me into like submission. And by the end, I was like, oh wow, I know this move. I know this move set really well. Like playing a boss like in Dark Souls 3, like maybe the most aggressive boss is like Slave Knight Guile. He's like the final DLC boss in Dark Souls 3. He's like hyper aggressive, but even still, Genichiro's faster. But then also your character has some pros to counter. There's no stamina bar. You can like Makiri counter. You can like dodge. You can do some countering. Like you get the rhythm of like the taps for countering, and then it's kind of just you have that rhythm. It almost feels like a dance game or something, like Parappa the Rapper or something like that. And then you just like always know. There's a time I'm sure you got to where you're like never gonna lose on Genichiro. You just know it when he like pulls back his sword and it glints. He's gonna do like a 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 4 or something.
Yeah.
So that was the moment. That was the boss where I was like, okay, I felt good on him. Not that you have it mastered, but you have it. You have the buy-in for the rest of the game at that point.
Totally, man. I couldn't agree more. For me, like, there are a few. It's funny, I didn't really like think about making a boss list because, like, how you were saying you did, but like, because I was trying to think about what are some pivotal like moments in video games, and especially just like with bigger picture.
Yeah.
And for me, Genichiro was definitely one of, because up until there, you can tank your way through some of the early bosses or mini bosses, or you just can kind of get lucky. But with Genichiro, it's funny because I didn't even realize that until my second playthrough, I was like now it's like, oh, you can get to him in like an hour of playing. But my first playthrough, it was like just this huge slog to get to him. And then, 60 tries to beat him. And I was like, wow, I must be near the end game now. Like, like not realizing this is basically like baby's first boss. But I think they did such a great job, and something, I think video games in general, like they have to be like, they have to teach and they have to be instructive. And there's so much about having like the right difficulty. And, it doesn't matter how cool the mechanics are of a game if they don't feel good. Like if it doesn't feel fun or it doesn't feel like that's the way you want to play with them. If it's clunky, if it's, slow, you're not going to want to use it. And something about that fight was just like, oh, it's funny how it's such a funnel. And I've talked with a few people about this. Like there's a lot of ways you can go into that game, but it really feels like there's one way you can come out of Genichiro.
Yeah, it's true. It's really, and I think those ones that stand out are the ones where you try them like 60 times. I mean, I think I had probably 60 or more on Slave Knight Guile. Some of these other bosses, I look at my list, I'm like, what makes them so memorable? The same way, like what makes, you can have a memorable flash, especially if you're like, wow, I just executed really well and you remember it and stuff like that. But mostly people kind of lean towards like their first big project or something that they, something clicked, or they had to get a little bit stronger, or they had to get a little bit sharper, or like develop themselves in a way. And yeah, I think it's like pretty artfully done. We're talking about FromSoft a lot, and that's like my favorite game series, but it's artfully done in like even like the old Mega Man games where you're like, oh, what route do I take
to
fight these bosses? Because like if I fight like, I don't know, this man, then I get this power up and it helps me beat this person, and the ice weapon helps me beat the fire boss, and all this, like, kind of Castlevania does it too. Like what's the route, that we're going, and that's like the satisfying thing to figure out. Like it's all laid out there for you, but you have to figure it out and execute it.
I haven't actually played those old Mega Man games, but it's funny, like I was watching a video that was talking about that, and like this idea of choice and how that was like with that game. They were like, yeah, you had like 9 worlds with different bosses, and whichever one you went to, you got to choose, which is super cool. Like,
Well, tell me this. Like, what do you think about like? Because I was kind of thinking about this. Like, some of my favorite games, some of my favorite like. I don't know if it's because like of what I'm in the mood for, but do you prefer like an open world like that? Because that is kind of like a first open world, open choice, or do you prefer more of a linear? I think Sekiro is pretty linear, and I think it's a big strength in that game. Whereas like, um, like Zelda made that big switch from like linear to open world, and it's like now the most popular Zelda ever.
yeah. So this is interesting, and actually, it's like kind of goes to one of my favorite bosses. But like, I would tell you, I like more open, but realistically, like, I like how Sekiro is because it is, yes, it's linear, but there's still a lot of choice within it. Yeah, it was just the kind of thing that like made me really pause. And I remember even for days after I would think about it, but it's in Hollow Knight. There's the boss called the Mantis Lords. So it's like the three Mantis Queens. I think up until Hollow Knight, every game I had played for the most part is so linear. Like, and not in a bad way, but you play like 007 GoldenEye, and it's like there are 13 levels. And even though you can explore around, there are more or less checkpoints, there are things you do. Yeah, even with so many of these games that might feel open, you're really stuck on a path. Sometimes it's really cool and you're like, oh, this is great. This path is awesome. But then maybe you hit a boss and you're like, God, I am just getting my teeth kicked in time after time. This doesn't feel fun. Which we'll talk about the idea of like fun versus challenge later too. But yeah, like it's one of those things, and it's like, oh, I'm not really enjoying this. And like I used to run track and cross country when I was younger. Loved training. Like I loved long runs. I loved track work. I loved lifting. Wish I would have lifted for not just lower body in high school, but here I am. But yeah, like I loved training for running, but I hated races. And I think it's because it always felt like, I don't know, it was like this thing I had to do. Like it didn't feel like I had the free will anymore. I was like, well, I'm here. I got to earn points for the team. Like this is what we're doing. You're on the line. And then the second, like the gun would go off and you'd run, it was fun and it was great. But it was just so much nerves and I hated it. With the Mantis Lords, I found it so interesting because you're going down and you drop down into this giant room. Background music goes silent. Like we all know the tells. Like I'm going to take a few more steps forward. A cage is going to slam shut around me. Boss music is going to start. And I'm now locked into a fight to the death. Yeah. It's like, it is such a trope, but that's how they always work. And I remember dropping in, it's like completely silent, and you start walking and you see the three Mantis Lords looking down at you and their eyes are tracking you. You're like, okay, any second now. And you keep going, and you're like, oh, like I can just keep walking. And there's an open door at the end and you can go to it and then they slam it shut. You're like, okay. And you're like, well, clearly I have to beat them if I want to get through this. And you walk back. And I thought this was so cleverly done. There's a little text box that when you're standing right in front of them, it's a text box with an arrow that points to you and it says challenge. And so it's up to you. Like, this is an optional boss. You don't have to face them. And something about it, because that boss also took me a lot of times. That was like my Genichiro of Hollow Knight. But whenever you do decide to challenge them, you turn to them, you draw out your sword. It's not until that happens that they stand up and the fight commences. And something about that idea of like, you have agency here. Like you were the one who prompted this. This wasn't like a boss fight that happens to you. I just thought that was such a cool way to do things. And because every single time you go back and it no longer felt like, oh, I'm walking into this room to get attacked. It's like I'm walking in, I hit the challenge button, I draw my sword, let's go.
Yeah, it really changes that paradigm. I was like having flashbacks playing that boss when you were talking about it because I love Hollow Knight. I played it on the Switch first, and then I think it released maybe like a year and a half ago for free on PlayStation. Like
nice.
they do their like monthly free games. I was like, oh hell yeah, this is like super high quality. And that developing team, Team Cherry, they're like I think it's like 2 or 3. I mean, don't quote me on it, but
no, yeah, I think you're right. I think it's like 3.
Like, I think it's like 2 or 3 from like Australia or New Zealand or something like that.
Yeah,
and they based it on this old. I'm forgetting the name of it, but they based it on this old NES game where you like you like Hollow Knight, you kind of like dig down, right? You like go deeper and deeper and open up all these like chambers, and but like it's like you're going underground. Like you start and you're like on ground level, and then you go underneath. They basically flipped that for their game based on the old NES game where you like rise up through the heavens and explore and all that stuff. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And the mechanics are so awesome. But yeah, I think it's that switch that puts you, it like forces perspective and puts you in that hero's role, right? Like, okay, what
Yes.
am I? What am I now? Like you said, you use the word agency, right? Like, what is my mission here underground? What am I doing? You know, and there's some nobility to that fight. There's all this ceremony. You walk up, they're in their thrones, if I remember right.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
their thrones are all elevated, and it's this very like, okay, we will challenge, and then we'll respect you enough to open this door once you defeat us.
Yeah. Yes.
Changes everything.
No, it does. And man, it makes me so happy to hear you felt this same way. Cause yeah, there was something like that gave me so much buy-in on this game. The game was already good, but it shifted my perspective of I'm just like this little bug going around and getting in fights to, yeah, what am I here for? What is this mission? Like, I'm the main character. You know, as
Yeah.
silly as that sounds, but it's like, oh, that's right. There is a big thing here. And something about that, triggered that for me. And I just thought it was so great. And especially, I mean, I know you played sports growing up as well, but like, I know, especially in climbing, it can feel sometimes like this linear path, especially sport climbing, because you go out and you're like, okay, I've got 2 burns on my project today. I'm locked in, and it always gives me that same kind of nervousness as like running used to do. And while it doesn't take it away to remind myself like, oh, I'm here because I want to be, like I'm the one who gets to challenge this route. It definitely helps.
Yeah, I think it helps too. And you know, I don't do a ton of outdoor rock climbing in the last, I don't even know. I mean, coming up on like 10 years, I haven't done a ton of like regular every week outdoor rock climbing. Not necessarily because I'm unable. Like, I mean, I live very close to Red Rock and Craft and everything else. But, you know, just with work and other like life things, I'm on the board, and recently going out to Switzerland and kind of like testing myself or challenging myself on rock felt a lot different than it had previously. Like even when I went in 2022, you know, I think I still had the mindset of like, I have to do this. I have to. It's like that mindset where that can get, you know, like heavy on your brain where you're like, I have to do this. I have to do it. I have to do it. It very much felt this last trip I was there, and I was like, oh, I get to like challenge this rock to, you know, a contest of skills or whatever, that I've maybe want to see if it translated from the board, or if you know, it translated with me and my fitness. And especially because I had been really isolated into my garage. You know, I was working graveyard, and all I was doing was climbing in my garage at like, you know, like pretty regularly, like 2 a.m. because I was keeping like a nocturnal schedule.
Yeah.
So I would like wake up at like 5, 6, sometimes 7 p.m. and then have coffee, like listen to records, read a little bit, do whatever, and then like have something to eat before a session. And then all of a sudden it's like midnight, 1. Okay, cool. I'm in a session from 1 to 5 a.m. or something crazy, you know. When the sun comes up, it's like I'm going to sleep. And I think it was nice to, you know, I hadn't made the connection until we started talking about Hollow Knight and like challenging, but you know, walking up and be like, okay, hey, can I like, how can I do on this like boulder problem, this like boulder outside? How am I going to interact with it versus like, I have to do it for whatever internal, external validation or etc.
Yeah. Dude, that's really cool.
Yeah, it was nice. It was like it felt really freeing. Like just, you know, I have all these constraints that I maybe never used to have when I was younger, but it was just, I just felt myself being grateful to be okay, I can go to sleep whenever I want. I can wake up whenever I want. Whenever I want to naturally go and challenge it, I can, press that little prompt in my mind
Yeah.
controller, and challenge the boulder.
Wait, were you staying on a nocturnal schedule over in Switzerland, or?
No, it was nice. I was there long enough, and that was the only really tough part about graveyard is that like working those overnight shifts, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners do as well, shift work or in certain fields. But the only tough part for me was everything outside of work. Like the work was fine, and then my days off, if I didn't have anything going on, I could stay on that schedule okay and like train and things like that. It's when you have like an 11 a.m. dentist appointment. And like you're like, oh, well, I'm usually sleeping now. Like this is like it would be the equivalent of someone with a 9 to 5 going to the dentist at like midnight. It's like I don't do that. So everything else was fine. But what was nice in Switzerland is I got over the jet lag pretty quick, and then I was able to just have kind of a like my like rhythm is more like going to bed at like maybe midnight, maybe 12:30, and then waking up a little bit later and like, climbing around like 2 or 3 in the afternoon. That's like when I typically perform the best is like that window between like maybe early afternoon to like 5, 6 p.m.
That's a nice schedule to be able to be on.
It was great. I mean, it was like it's a vacation, so
Yeah.
it's just not a realistic schedule I can kind of replicate, but it was cool.
All right, so I've got a question for you, and I've never heard someone ask you this before. I don't think so. Hopefully, I get to be the first on this.
I feel like you've known me longer than everyone else I've chatted with. Like we go way back.
Yeah, and this will actually like kind of tie into that a little bit. You had posted in your Instagram stories years ago, and it was a Polaroid of, I think, from when you were a kid, and it was all your leveled up video game characters. Do you remember that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that's from like 1999. That sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me first off, what was in that photo?
Oh yeah, for sure. It was a Polaroid I took. So I grew up in Michigan, and it's from like a basement with like wood panel walls from like a house built in like the 70s that I lived in as a kid in the 90s. But it was a Polaroid of a TV screen, some like bubbly square, probably like 18 by 18 screen or something like that, like a tiny little screen of all my characters in Final Fantasy VII. It was Cloud, Vincent, and Barrett, probably in that order, because I'm like a 12-year-old kid. So I'm like, yeah, I want all like I want the vampire and the dude with the big sword and the dude with a gun for an arm or whatever,
Totally.
And they're all level 99. And then the my favorite part about that is like now it seems it's like pretty commonplace to spend like 100 hours playing a video game. I mean, I think almost everybody that beats Elden Ring is probably going to be around 100 hours. Same with with either of the new Zeldas.
Yeah.
It's like pretty common to spend 100 hours. But back in 1999, it was like a lot. Like a lot.
Totally.
Like,
yeah.
it was like, oh man, that's your whole summer. Or hey, that's like. I was always pretty athletic and like played and stuff like that, whatever. But then, the nights and in the evenings, especially in the summer, I was like reading books or watching movies or playing video games. And the timer on that photo is like 99 hours, 59 minutes, 59 seconds. And it's just maxed out.
Oh,
it's
crazy.
Like it ends, which is so cool. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. And I had like a custom like background. They had like an RGB slider that you could like make a custom like color background or whatever. So it was like my save point right before I think I beat Sephiroth or something like that. So it was not that you need to be that high for that to do that. It was like overkill by a lot, but yeah, that's what that photo is.
That's super cool.
So Final Fantasy nerds are going to be like, sweet. And then everyone else is going to be like, what are you talking about, dude?
I stayed with you until wood panel walls. I don't remember anything else after.
I don't remember anything else. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can picture a Michigan basement in the 90s and probably what it smells like.
Yes. Why am I smelling wet carpet?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so good. Why are there ducks on the wall?
This also, Michigan basement. This is all checking out. So I guess like why I brought that up is that's sort of like a completionist sort of thing to have these characters fully maxed out. And you are well known for being the first person to 100% the 2016 benchmarks. Like, I guess, when did that kind of completionist mindset start?
I mean, I remember. Did you have this in your elementary school, like on the blacktop, like a pretty big map of the U.S.?
Yes. I used to try and see how far I could ride a wheelie, how many states I could ride across on my bike. And that was how I measured, was how many states I would go across.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's like, and then when you skateboard, it's like, oh, can I manual the whole U.S. or something like that? Or can I nose manual it? All these little like fun little challenges that you just make up for yourself because I don't know. I mean, I think it was born out of like, okay, so I forget when Final Fantasy VII came out, but that was like the big one I wanted to play on PlayStation, and I saved up for it for a couple years, and then like got a PlayStation with Final Fantasy VII, and then didn't know you needed a memory card. So same sort of thing we were talking about with Chris, where it's like I remember playing the first like 5 hours or 4 hours of that game like 10 times before I was like, okay, can I please go get a memory card? It's like it saved my progress. And my dad will still make fun of me. He'll be like, hey, did you get a save point or something like whatever, like all this time where it's like I can't save. I'm in the middle of like fighting Ruby Weapon or something stupid.
Yeah. Oh man.
But I think all that completionism was like, it's satisfying to me. I like the grind. I like the minutia of like getting all the little things. I think it just activates something in my brain. It's a personality thing. It's not just me. It's the same reason people collect like whatever they collect. But I like doing it. But it was born out of just having like the one game. So it's like, oh, I want to do all the stuff in this one game. And then maybe for your birthday or Christmas you get like another game. And I always like these really long games where there's all this stuff to do, collect all these things or do all these challenges or these extra bosses or whatever. So, so I like it. And then I think that kind of carried through and was a factor of why I liked, same as you, training. Like I played football, ran track, lifted all through high school. And then when I was done, like I was like that, like, hey, it's the basic level of like, oh, I can lift more than I could last year or last month or whatever. And then I really liked early on, like right after high school, getting into climbing, I liked the same thing of like, oh, this is like, V1, V2, V3, or this pinches or these crimps or whatever, thinking about problem solving and all that. So yeah, that was kind of always like a big draw for me climbing wise is like putting myself up against a challenge and then trying to like do all of the X in a gym, all of the Y in a gym, all of these things. It's just, it like feels nice to my brain. It feels like relaxing.
Yeah. It's funny. For anyone who's listened since like the very early days of Power Company climbing, I used to reference ATB all the time, all the boulders.
That's it. That's us.
Yeah. And that's like, I don't, that's where it started, was climbing with you in Waco. We were just like, oh, well, we need to do all the boulders. And like, I remember we would go out and be like, okay, we got to hit at least like 5 new boulders every day we go out, even if it was like, 0-star V1s, who cares? Like, we're just doing new boulders. And yeah, it's funny because at the time I was like, oh, well, I mean, it makes sense. Why doesn't everyone do this? Because I think like that was my first winter after college, went out and like met up with you. And I was like, does everyone not do this? And it just turns out it was like just the two of us who just happened to like connect over this. We're like, wait, you also want to do 400 boulders this winter? Sick.
Yeah. And it was I'm telling you, it was so formative. Like I was telling some people about like recording with you and how I was excited, how we know each other. And I was talking about those days and, you see their eyes glaze over and you're like, all right, cool, I'll stop. But, but yeah, it was. And then remember we would get into these conversations and like, wow, this is like, an underrated boulder. This has a great move. This has this. And like those little hits of like, oh, there's all this quality and all this value in things that are maybe off the beaten path or more underground or more like lesser known. Remember we would do tours and like, you have to do this like V1 in the warm up area. We'd like make everybody do it.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, I just want to go do like Genghis bells or whatever.
You're going to do overthrowing Italy.
Yeah.
But don't touch that hold. It's way cooler if you don't touch that hold.
Just, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Me and Ravioli have this cool link up. You got to do it.
Yeah, it's cool. It's like you climb up this warm up and then down, and then you kind of like skirt along the boulder and traverse, and it's good. It warms you up, and then you go up this other V0, and it's cool. So do it.
Yes. No, and I completely agree. And it's funny because anyone can like a classic. Like, oh, you like Wet Dream? Cool. Like, of course you do. It's a 45. It's beautiful. It's tall, comfy holds. Yeah. But you show
secluded.
me someone. Yeah. It's exactly flat landing. You show me someone who likes just a 2-star low ball with like some kind of gnarly holds. I'm going to show you someone who's here for the love of the game.
That's it. Exactly.
Yeah. And I honestly, I think that winter really instilled that in me. Like it's hilarious. I remember when Drew Mack was like going to Waco for the first time, he was like, Nate, can you write me a list of things to do? I was like, I can. And you're going to have to trust me on some of these because people are going to doubt you. And sure enough, he like texted me after being there for a week. He was like, people are saying your list is whack. I was like, they're wrong. You need to go do Gloria right now.
Yeah. Go do Gloria. Why wouldn't you? Go do some of these things over by, over in like the meat factory or whatever.
Yeah.
Go do some of these West Mountain. I remember one of the, a fun tour I went on with, was it, it was, I think Andrew Rothner was the guide. I can't remember. We might've been on it together, but it was, it's like the Mark of the Beast West Mountain tour. And you and I know did a Mark of the Beast East Mountain tour.
Yes.
With those classics, but I'm not sure if we went on the West Mountain one. I thought we did together. Anyway,
I don't think I was there. Yeah.
It's like 3 and I love the theme where it's like, this is all we're going to, we're not going to the Feather. We're not going to any of these other things. We're going to go to these 3 6s on West Mountain, and they're all like 30 moves. So essentially we're going to be doing like 3 pitches today if you flash all of them.
Yeah.
And it's great.
If you're lucky, you'll be doing 3 pitches today.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, this is getting me so psyched. I love challenges. Like that kind of stuff I think is so fun. And the same thing with the ATB and even the idea of completionist. Whenever you first started climbing on the Moonboard, was that part of the plan?
Yeah, I mean, initially it was like a check it out and then a recovery plan for breaking my foot, because it was like it sounds a little counterintuitive to be like, oh, like getting back to climbing by climbing on the Moonboard, but it was short and I could like kind of mess around with one foot and things like that. And I wanted to test it out. And then I saw like the video game aspect of it like right away. And that was for sure like part of the get back to full strength and kind of get back on my feet plan was like, oh, this is cool. This is a brand new set of boulders in a gym at the time where I was climbing where they only reset like 2 times a year or something like that. So it's like,
classic.
You do all those and then the first week and then you don't have anything else. So it was this really untapped, just like untapped set of boulders. And I really, really enjoyed, doing all of them because it would teach me a lot. Like not just like, oh, I'm doing all the V4s. I'm pretty confident I can do all the V4s. Like the ones at the end, maybe with the least repeats or that were the hardest, they taught me a ton. same with like, I always use the example of Bazoo on 2016. It's like
Oh,
a
yeah.
V8, and it's got this like big, like, there's a couple boulders on the 2016 that have this big like throw over your head and catch something like way off axis and do this like spin, and then you check the spin. It's a very bored move, but at the time, when I was started in like 2000 end of 2017 trying these moves, I'm like, dude, I've never done moves like this.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a like I'm not interested as much in like the like I like watching, but I'm not as interested in like doing the World Cup movement. I think it's cool to check out, but that was like a mini aspect of like, wow, I'm like really throwing over my head, latching something, putting my feet back on. And if I wasn't doing all the V8s, I would probably just skip it and go to some V9s and be like, oh, cool, I want to try these or some 10s or whatever. But it forced me to learn, and it still forces me to learn, which is crazy. I'm like almost 6,000 boulders in.
Oh God.
Like overall over 3 sets, and then I have some tension board too, and some tension board stuff, which I've been kind of doing more recently with Jonathan and with Alex, and it's been awesome. It's been really fun.
That's
I don't know.
cool.
I'm still having fun. That's the thing. Is like I'm still enjoying it. I'm still having fun. I still get a lot of value out of it. That's a long answer for how I got into completionism, but I mean, I think it's just in there. I think it's like you said, it's the love of the game. It's like really loving like the way my fingers hit a certain hold on a certain boulder. Like I don't need it to be super classic. I really don't. Like there's value in a ton of trash, a ton of choss or whatever. There is value in it. I'm very movement first, when I set too.
The thing I like the most about the benchmarks, which like they're definitely, I feel like there are people who are like, oh, like not in love with benchmarks, but also just, people are not in love with everything. But the thing I think that is like, I mean, if we're being real.
Yeah, accurate. Just so accurate.
Like, but the thing I love about it so much is that like it's gamified in a way. Like the same thing with the tension board. They do the thing I love that Will did with the tension board is they have the crisscrossing check marks. It's like 2 crossed swords. You're like, you do one, and God forbid you have a backwards one. If you're looking at your logbook and you see like check, backwards check, and you see a double check, you're like, fuck, well, okay, I got to do double check on all of them.
Yeah.
Like I have to.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Like,
yeah. I'm deep in that now. I've been liking it a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just great. And it's all visual. It's all just visual. Like the mirroring system in general is good, but like it's that little check.
Yes. Great. It does. It's like what you were saying. It does something for my brain. I'm like, I need the check. In the benchmarks, what I love about it is like there just aren't that many, like in a good way. So, if you go through and you're like, okay, cool, I'm going to do as many 4s as I can, as many 5s as I can, as 6s as I can. Then eventually you're going to go back and you'll be like, okay, let's go back. Let's try and do all the 4s that are left. And because the thing is, this sounds silly, but if you think about how do you know if something is hard for you? Like, well, you fall on it or you struggle to do it. Okay. Well, what's better for like working your weaknesses than finding just a pile of boulders that are hard for you that like you can't do? And because there is this constraint of the benchmarks of, hey, here's 500 boulders, whatever it is, work through as many as you can. And then you have this nice curation of different boulders where you're just like, okay, like these are clearly the things that are hard for me. I should go back and do them now. I think that's fantastic. I like gym climbing. I like board climbing. I like all the things. But honestly, man, like the Moonboard can be overwhelming. Like I feel like every time, especially I'll open the 2016 app, I'm like, what are y'all at? Like 64,000 boulders now?
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think it is close to 60,000. And I mean it, or maybe it's like, well, it's like when people talk about like liking a set versus a different set and this and that. It's like you have to give sets some room to breathe. I mean, we're talking about we're going to be coming up in a couple of years on like the 10-year anniversary of the 2016 set, which I'm psyched on. Great, cool, revisit it. But I'm like, okay, 2019 has a third of the boulders. 2024, I don't know exactly what the set is right now, when I got the holds, there were like less than 50 problems set. So
Yeah.
I'm like, well, let's, and I would get a lot of messages, and please keep sending them. Like I respond to everybody, but I was like inundated at the beginning, understandably so, by people that were excited. Like, how are they? How is it? How are they? Like, people have a tendency to want like final verdict stuff right away. I mean, it's just this like immediacy right now with like media or video games or books or whatever. Like, is it good? Is it good? Is it good? Is it classic? Is it really good?
Yeah.
And it's like, it takes so much time. Like, I still don't really have, I have like early thoughts, but I've only done 304. I've only like sent 304 boulders on 2024, whereas I've done 3,500 on 2016. I have a more of a like solidified opinion on 2016, strengths, weaknesses, etc. 2024 is like, just go climb it, just have fun. Just it's fun, it's new, it's exciting. Go and do it. That's I think people kind of rush to like, oh, is it good? Should I get it? And I get it. There's like a monetary factor there for your gym or for your home board or whatever. I think it is worthwhile, but yeah, there's not going to be a ton of benchmarks yet.
Yeah.
There just won't be. There can't be, because you can't. You want to be kind of precious benchmarking something, because if it's like, you don't want to unbenchmark it. No one wants to do it. And like, my problem that I sent got unbenchmarked. It took me a whole year to do.
Dude, I have that.
Sucks.
I have that story. Like, I think when they started benchmarks, this was one of the only V9s that was benched, and it's a Ben Moon V9 called War.
Ooh, okay.
That is nails. It is so hard. Like, I was trying the side quest of trying to do as many Ben Moon boulders.
Yeah,
And
I like that quest.
that rough. But this one, like when it first got benchmark, I was like, cool, I want to do it. And then, but also this was pre-LEDs on everything. So
Yeah.
like, I didn't need to keep looking in my phone for it, because I knew what it was. And at one point I went back and I was just like, oh, I'm like super close on this thing. This will be cool. It'll be my first benchmark 9, and opened up the app and it wasn't benchmark anymore. And I was like, oh,
no.
And I mean, like, I've always been better on rock than on plastic, and even more so on boards, which is like fun and I like it. But I was just like, dude, I feel like I'm giving V12 effort on this thing. Like,
oh yeah,
it is so hard. Like, I have dedicated time. Also, the gym I was climbing at the time didn't have pads that extended to the left side yet. They like stopped. And this was like it has a giant crossbody jump to that black sloper on the corner, the same one that Project 2 ends on. So it was like giant cross move to that, like, for me, wildly uncontrolled. And it's like, cool, I'm going to go like 3 feet off the mats. And like, best case, I stop by hitting an I-beam, like coming through this building. Like,
I'm having flashbacks right now, climbing at the attic that I used to climb in.
Yeah, exactly like that. It was just
man.
It was one of those things I was like, oh, sick, I'm going to get a benchmark 9.
Yeah. And that's, that story is like, you want to be a little careful with what you're benchmarking, like keeping it versus taking it away versus this and that. What I still look forward to, and what I enjoy, is like the community aspect is what's kind of keeping me going, like for the last couple years, because I'm not really in general like training. I know you and I have talked about going back to Waco. I'd love to have like a Waco reunion.
Dude, that'd be great.
In the next year or two, and not even like huge goals, just like going and getting on some of the old classics that we used to guide on, and that we used to like walk by and be like, man, I don't know if I'll like ever be strong enough to try this boulder or whatever, and then just go try them. Who cares? That's like something I think that's like really, if I were to like encourage, your new listeners, new climbers, that are kind of like into it, climbing a bunch, consuming podcasts and training plans and things like that are like in it, super in it, like we were early on, I would say like, just get on whatever, respectfully and within your, whatever. But like, just get on stuff, get on it. Who cares? Like, I used to have I'd be like, no, I can't try that. B13. I can't try this. I can't try that. I think moonboarding's really helped break that open, because I don't care at all about grading whatsoever. I'm at a different point in my life. I used to a lot. I'm not one of these guys that pretends like I never cared about grades, but I'm just like, cool. This V9, like you said, feels like V12. V12 feels like V9. It doesn't matter to me. I'm just like, cool. What's the movement? What's the challenge? What's the value that I'm getting out of this? Same thing with these bosses. There's some bosses that like this is going to sound wild, but like in Elden Ring, like Millennia was not that hard for me. I had the mechanics down and like did it pretty quickly. Whereas like some of the other maybe easier bosses, I like struggled on a lot. Like I don't know if Ornstein and Smog from Dark Souls 1 is considered easy, or it's a famous boss, but like that one was so hard for me. I think people do it pretty quick. Father Gascoigne in Bloodborne, people do it quick, but it took me forever. So, I'm not saying anything new here. I'm just saying like maybe use the board to change your paradigm about what you try outside.
No, I love that. And it's, that is something I really like about games too, is that in a lot of ways it can be very individual, especially like the games we're talking about. It's if I got whomped by 7 spears in Sekiro, like one of the early game mini bosses. Like,
Yeah.
took me a lot of tries, but it was one of those things. It's like, I'm not over here just like, oh no, like how quickly did Ravioli do it? I'm not like, none of this was going on. Like, I'm not looking around and comparing myself. And so I was like, by the time I finally beat him, I was like, amazing. This is great. And that is something I really like about video games, is that it can be this individual experience. Like, and you can still get to like share and talk about it with friends. And I think climbing can very much be that way. But, and it's hard because especially climbing's so fun. You get into it and yeah, it's hard not to make it your personality at some point. And even then it's like, by an extension, it's like, well, how long did this take you? How hard do you climb? This stuff can start to feel an extension of you where it really shouldn't. Like we can put so much strange pressure on ourselves in that way. And it's funny because like with video games, I can just be like, oh, it's a video game. Like it's hilarious. Like I just got like, on what was that? I just did the Shura ending on Sekiro, and like you have to face Emma before the old Ishin. And like sometimes I would go out.
Right.
Yeah. And like
is that where the Shura is like you have the flower at the end? And you give what is it? What item do you need? It's been a minute since I did all those endings.
Shura's where you go bad and you decide to kill everyone.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Yes, that's right. And then everything's like flaming at the end. Sorry, spoilers
exactly.
for everyone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's sick.
It's like, the bad ending. Like, they just like cut to black and text comes up. It's like tens of thousands were killed and everyone said there's a monster that still hides in the hills. You were the monster. But so I did that ending not too long ago. And like, there's the little like pre-boss, which is Emma. And she like, you fight her and then it's Ishin who can like shoot flames out of nowhere.
Emma's fight is really cool. She's like all slow and then like really fast, right? Like she's got these really like quick, kind of like very anime like attacks.
Yeah, it's like this slow flowing, graceful, and then just like super fast strikes. And when you get it down, you just like knock her out super quick, and you're like, okay, let's get to the real boss. But then, I would say every like 5 tries, I would literally like not get a hit on her. I would just like get completely destroyed. And I just laugh about it. I'm like, oh man, okay, cool. Like just wipe my hands off because I'm clearly sweating because the emotional effect of video games is just like is comical to me. But yeah, it's just like, okay, cool. Like wipe my hands off, laugh, and let's just play again. Like, and it's this game has really kind of changed my perspective on the mental side of climbing. And I think also that's just, getting older, having new perspective and like different priorities too. To me, like my own personal performance in climbing is on a lower tier from like my coaching at this point, which at a point was like weird to think about. But now it's like, I don't know, climbing's just gotten more fun. But
that's good.
Yeah. And
that's cool.
I've been spending a lot of time kind of thinking about the mental side of climbing. And it's funny, I think Sekiro helped with that because yeah, like on one hand, I can laugh about just like it's a video game, it's silly, but
Yeah.
also I can get so invested. I remember when I was playing Genichiro the first time, I would literally like,
Yeah.
I'd be like, okay, cool. Before we grapple up to the top of the castle, like just remember, just breathe, keep breathing the whole time, dude. And I'd be like halfway through his first phase, just completely holding my
Oh,
breath and like white knuckling.
oh yeah. You're like the Key and Peele like gif where he's like dripping, you
Yes,
know, like
dude, it every single time, and I would just be like so stressed. And it,
yeah,
and then it would end. It'd be hard not to laugh at myself for it. Because also it's like, okay, this is a completely safe situation. Like, especially if I'm comparing it to climbing. Like,
yeah.
I am not above a bolt. I am like, I could try this 30 more times today. There is zero issue with me failing. Why am I nervous? And
There's
I
no
can,
pressure to leave the state, or your trip is, or am I going to get injured, or am I going to do this? Yeah, yeah,
yeah. And I can, like, I can say this on one hand. Yes, clearly there is no reason to be nervous, but then I still feel all these nerves, which is like also very enjoyable in some way because it definitely
yeah,
makes it a bigger payoff. But just seeing that, this kind of almost comical situation, it made me kind of give myself a little more slack as a climber to where it's like, hey,
yeah.
like climbing has a lot of things around it, and I don't need to pretend that I don't get stressed, that there aren't all these like mental barriers there. If a silly video game makes me feel all of these things, which it's not really silly, it's great, go play it. But
Yeah.
like if this makes me feel that way, then yeah, it makes total sense that climbing, like that I will feel stressed out if I'm like, ooh, like it's been a while since I've climbed a grade this hard, and like a bunch of people are here. Someone was just like, hey, I like the YouTube. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I can put these weird pressures on myself where realistically
Yep.
that doesn't need to be there. And even if it is, I don't need to be stressed
Like,
over the fact that it's there.
or give it so much like weight, like you can like acknowledge it and be like, okay, cool, it's there. This pressure is there. Like, yes, I am second day on. Yes, it is my last day of the trip. Yes, I may never get back here. Okay, like just acknowledge them, right?
Yeah.
And then I think like on the flip side too, like that ability to like to recognize all those emotions and how invested you are in the game, and how that can be like a cool thing, an empowering thing, and not everything in life makes you feel that way. Like I don't feel this investment when I'm like sending a fucking email or something. You know what I mean? It's like, or just like doing some stupid admin thing. I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, but it's cool that like we have these things. Climbing being a big part of it, video games, and other things. That's like, wow, this is really making me feel. And then on the flip side, doing all this repetition, all these like hard, difficult things, learning and mastering and learning a move set on a boss or something is like, and then just laughing if you like die because it's like you died in a silly way, or like I remember like I was fighting like I think Dark Eater Madir in Dark Souls 3. It's like this gigantic dragon. It's like an amazing boss, this huge dragon, and you're like a little guy, and you have to fight. You have to fight him really head on. You can't like. There's a Dark Souls tactic where it's like you just like roll around and like smack their ass with like a sword,
Yeah.
But like you have to fight this dragon really head on, and I got him down to like, this is like a cliche video game story. It's like you get him down to like a little hair of health bar left,
Oh,
and
that's
then
when
he
things go
just like,
bad.
yeah, and then and I'm feeling all of the emotions and all the like physical reactions you said, like my controller's slipping out of my hand, and I'm like, oh my god, dude, I'm one hit from this boss that I've tried 100 times or whatever. And I see I see him telegraph the next attack, and I know how to dodge it,
Yeah.
but I get like I could have just been like, boom, like if it was early in the game, instantly would have dodged it. Cool, wait for your window of opportunity, attack. I was so close, I just like got greedy, and it's like a very common it's a very common punishment in From Souls games or From Soft games where you get like punished for being greedy. You're like, I just want that one extra hit, and they're like, nope, you have to have discipline the entire fight, otherwise you're gonna get stomped. Of course, I got stomped. I remember putting it down and being like, that was my fault. Like, you know what I mean? Like laughing because it's like yeah, like you got me. It's like, you get like in a movie where they get caught cheating at cards in like a Western. It's like, hey, you got me.
Yeah.
But, that was on me. But I just remember laughing. And I've had that since playing all these games, or since maybe realizing it or thinking about it like you've been thinking about, where like, yeah, that was on me. I maybe didn't rest long enough. I maybe was like, whatever, some factor that I can take accountability for, whereas maybe in my early climbing I would have been like, what the fuck, man, I'm owed this boulder or something.
Totally.
So it's been a cool progression, I guess, emotionally for gaming and climbing.
Yeah, that's super rad. It's I feel something similar as far, especially when it comes to like certain move sets, whether in more originating from video games, but definitely in climbing, like in the Shura ending against Ishin. Like if he's in just like a neutral stance and you take one quick swipe at him, he he does this thing which is like such a cool like storytelling thing. He moves like 2 inches to the side, so you just barely miss him. And
Yes.
if you overreach, if you immediately double tap the attack, because normally you can
Yep.
get 2 attacks in, like
I remember
fine.
this attack.
And if you do the quick double tap, which is like just something I'd started doing, he does this side swipe and just like does a ton of damage. And the first time he did it, I was like, that's perfect. Like that was perfect creation from this, like from soft. Because it's like, because this is also, you're fighting a 90-year-old man who was like the legend, but still kind of is, but we don't fully get to see him fight any other time. And the fact that you come out and you swing at him, and he doesn't do this big parry, he doesn't do a giant jump back or anything, just a little 2-inch move, and then he hits you in the side. It's like catches you overreaching. It's so well done, like both from mechanics but also storytelling. And it's like I love the idea of video game design, and because it tells stories. It has to teach you things. Like if mechanics are brought to you too quickly, they can feel overwhelming. If it's too slow, it's boring. You really want things to feel like you're learning things on your own. It's something I think Hollow Knight actually does really well. The way they teach you that walls are breakable is in one of the early stages. There's a bunch of little like money piles next to each other, like 5 of them. And the second you see this once, like immediately, every time you revisit, you're like, this is so obvious. It's literal breadcrumbs. But you knock one, you get the money. Go to the next one, get the money. And the 5th one is like touching a wall with a bunch of fissures in it. And when you swing it, your controller vibrates, the whole wall moves, you hear the audio, and you're like, oh, what is this? And you hit it again. And after a few hits, the wall breaks away. And in your mind, you're like, I just taught myself. I just learned something. I learned I can take down walls. And it's great. Suddenly that sticks with you so well. So yeah, I think like video game design and the way things taught are so interesting. And honestly, it's made me look at like route setting, but also just climbing in general differently. So instead of being like, oh, this is like a goofy move or things like that, looking at it as like, oh, what is the emotion that this move makes you feel? Like, oh, you're doing this giant cross move on Bazoo. It'd be easy for me to be like, no, thank you. But also, like maybe when you stick that, you're like, wow, I'm the main character. Like I just did this crazy cross move that seemed improbable. Like that is amazing. We can like when moves can have when they can create this emotion.
Yeah. And then when you complete them, yeah, you can feel this this accomplishment or this mastery, whether it's like you're coming off of an injury and, oh, hey, it's the first time you've done a heel hook since, your hamstring injury or something like that. There can be a lot attached to it, and having those small progressions is really key, I think, to fully um, enjoying and getting the most out of like a board session or board climbing. Like I climbed on the TB2 with Jonathan yesterday, and I didn't really send a whole lot. I didn't like complete a bunch of problems, but I was trying a bunch and like doing a lot of moves and maybe falling at the end or falling, like maybe starting. I couldn't do the first move, and so you do all of it and like enjoying that little progress. Like, wow, this is making me feel like really strong or really satisfied. And it was completely independent of sending. It was just all that emotion and that, energy between like you and, who you're training with. So yeah, I think that's pretty key to enjoying a board. And I think that could be something that detracts people from board climbing or from maybe uncomfortable movements in general. I mean, I spent years and years being like, oh, I'm just like not a small holds guy. I just like can't crimp. It's like, what? That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when we first started climbing.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we first started climbing, you were like the heel hook compression guy. Like I remember you crimping. I remember when you did Tequila Sunrise, you were like, God, those are some terrible little crimps. And like, I don't know if that just took a ton of work and that was everything on my fingers. But like, we go over to anything like steep, just big hold bashing. You were like, let's go. Like, this is it.
Yeah, but it was just such a mindset thing. And I think, I don't know, I definitely pigeonholed myself looking back. But I think that, breaking out of that, doing all the boulders and being, yeah, we're going to do C sharp, or we're going to do something else that's just small or sharp or whatever. I think, there's just so much value to doing a lot of different moves. And challenging yourself to do moves. I still have to do it. I still have to be disciplined, and because I just want to, sometimes I just want to flip through and be like, oh, I like this. This is what I like to do. But, it takes work. It takes work to be like, oh man, I'm not good at this. And I've tried it. It's been on my project list for like 6 months. People are like, how long do you work stuff on a board? It's like sometimes forever. Like, I don't know. I'll just like check myself. Oh, I'm having a good session. Maybe I'll try this thing that's been on my project list for, a year. And then, okay, maybe I do a new move and it's like the best session I've ever had or something.
Yeah.
It's but I like it. I enjoy it. It's nice. I think I used to feel some guilt about like, oh man, I'm just climbing on the board all the time. I should be really taking it outside and stuff. And it's like all that motivation comes and goes, and just have to embrace it. I think I fought myself for it for a while. Same way I fought like the mechanics of Genichiro. Just have to embrace it.
Yeah. Something that I like with video games, like, so I'd read this book, Reality is Broken by Jane McGonigal.
I just bought it. It's sitting on it's actually propped up right here. So I'm excited to read it after I'm rereading Crime and Punishment right now, but I'm going to read it.
Nice. She defines video games as having 4 key traits, or games in general. So you've got rules, voluntary participation, goals, and feedback. So voluntary participation, we can kind of like throw that one out. It's more or less, if you didn't sign up for it, it doesn't feel like a game. It's kind of like what what we were talking about earlier with, I was talking about racing, or even like the fights in linear games. How sometimes it's like, I don't feel like I signed up for this. I'm just a guy who walked into a room. Suddenly, like boss music started playing.
Yeah.
But the other 3, which are, sorry, I'm blanking on this.
Yeah. Rules, goals,
feedback.
So, yeah.
In a traditional game, so let's say like checkers, you're given rules and goals. It's like, okay, checkers, you can move this way. The goal is to, eliminate the other person. And then you play and you get feedback, and that can like inform strategy along the way. What I think is really cool about video games, but also modern video games plus climbing, is that we don't really have rules, like don't fall kind of. And then goals are also like something we can more or less determine for ourselves. So what happens is we end up just playing, we get feedback, and we have to learn, okay, what do you want your goals to be? Like, what do you want what are the rules based on the feedback? Like, because there's no manual in climbing that says, well, you have to heel hook, you have to do straight arms like this. Like, you just kind of bumble around and slowly you learn the mechanics. And then even with like, and same thing with video games, like you're just kind of dropped into a world and you're like, I'm going to interact with the world. And like most video games don't come with like, they're active tutorials. So it goes through and it's like, oh, you're going to break this wall and you're going to learn you can do that because there's a money thing next to it. And so that's how you're going to learn. So you get this feedback and you're like, oh, okay, some walls can break. I'm learning the rules here. And then goals kind of like happen organically. You can, as you play the game, you start to learn what is the goal. But I think in climbing, it can be the same. Like a goal can be, you start climbing and you're like, oh, my goal is to do all the boulders, or my goal is to sport climb, or just to go hang out with friends. Or it can be, my goal is just to board climb, like to have that as the primary thing I want to do. And I think that's such a rad aspect of climbing and something I wish I could have recognized when I was younger. Because, obviously when we're younger, it's like your way is the way. You know, just classically, I remember when I was a teenager, whenever I'd like argue with my dad, eventually he would just kind of throw up his hands and be like, I remember when I was a teenager and knew everything. Like, fucking classic dad move.
Yeah, that's a great dad line.
Yeah. But yeah, and also, unfortunately, the older I get, the more I look back, I'm like, he keeps being more right with time.
Yeah.
But yeah, like those early years of climbing, it's like, well, you have to climb the hard climbs or to climb the classics or whatever. Like whatever your way was the correct way, clearly. And the more I step away, the more, I don't know. I think it's just rad how many ways you can enjoy it. Like I coached a guy some years ago who I was like, what are your goals with this coaching? He was like, well, my wife's a badass and I'm not. So I want to be fit enough of a sport climber that I can go to the same crags as her so that she doesn't have to go to like the wimpy crags to go belay me. We can go to her projects. And I don't even care if I'm just projecting the warm-ups there, but I want to be able to go climb with her and support her. I was like, dude, that's like like, I'm going to coach you for free now. Like kind of thing. Like,
that's a cool goal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so defined,
Yeah. I was like, what a cool, like he was just like, I like getting to climb with my wife. That is my joy that I take from this sport. So I want to get better so that we can enjoy that better together. I can't, like, if anyone tried to be like, oh, I'm sorry, you're climbing for the wrong reason, sir. It's like,
you're like, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Like,
yeah.
While that's a very noble reason, I don't know. I just don't think there's really wrong reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say your goal is right now, you think, in your climbing in this era, this Drolet era?
Oh man. Like I'm getting back into the swing of things now. I've been climbing honestly just like 1 to 2 days a week for the last like year or so. I just like the way movement feels. Like it's fun. And for me it is like, cause also I do so much coaching that it's a puzzle to figure out how like other people move and how to help them. Dude, and it is like just become this new game on its own. So for me, like I'm trying to get back to being even more fit because it like it just movement feels more fun that way to me. But also it's I don't know. It's it just keeps shifting. But right now I just enjoy movement. Like it's cool. I built a home wall back behind my house in a little shed.
Nice.
And it's great. I'll go back there and I will literally just like, I don't know, I'll play on like 10 different moves for like an hour, just like breaking them apart and being like, oh, like that was cool. Can I make it harder? Why does this higher foot make it easier and not harder? Like playing around with stuff like that. Like, yeah. So that's been kind of my goal lately. Just having fun with it, really.
Yeah. Awesome. I like that. Yeah, I've really been enjoying the movement too. And it is interesting to think about like what the goal is. And like you said, it kind of moves. It's a bit of a moving target, and just understanding when it's moving, and you're not like, hey, like my goals and all of my practice is like moving towards this goal, but I'm just like, it's like you just took an exit off a highway and you're like, no, but my mindset is like still, just, I don't know, something else. So it's kind of interesting to kind of continually reassess it. Because I think like just doing some notes for like our chat, like I was thinking a bit about it, in the last couple of weeks, and it's like, I think my goal really is to like provide or like share whatever, like inspire whatever I can for people's like training and sessioning. Like you're a great coach, and it's awesome to see you develop in this like very like very actionable coaching position where you are like taking like helping people reach their goals. I think that's pretty inspiring, and I kind of like aim to do it in a bit of more of like an amorphous way of like, okay, like, inspiring people for just to stay, consistent, or, to be a little bit gentle with themselves, or even in, I mean, I love music and collecting records and stuff like that. And so even just like posting music where it's like, oh, hey, I got a new recommendation from someone. It's going to kind of like be in the background of my session, maybe make me climb a little harder, or at least a little bit longer, something like that. So I'm gonna climb this whole record out. So I think that's where I'm at now. That like just giving is pretty cool, because I've gotten a lot of like motivation support from, over the last couple of years, being like super isolated on Graveyard, going through some life stuff, being in some like places where I'm like, dude, I'm just climbing by myself all the time, So I'm drawing a ton of like inspiration from, you and other friends, and, people that I just talk to or chat with. And then, so I want to give it back out, that's it. So whether it's in the form of like, little recommendations or things, or actually setting, and enjoying movement, like you said, I still enjoy it. I still love it. I love the constraints of a board. I love setting within like, this is all I get.
Totally.
I think like there's something to be said about it too, with like in film or, books or any sort of like artistic endeavor where you're like, these are your rules. You can only use this many words. You can only use this type of film. It has to be black and white. You only get X amount of edits or whatever. It's kind of nice. It's like, it is very freeing to me to have some constraints, and to only be able to set within and to see what I can do in that space. And I still enjoy it. I mean, I was like probably going overboard with like setting for 2024, because a lot of it was, if I wanted to send something, I had to set something. There's not a lot of like new boulders being added initially. And I was like, okay, what, I'm not just going to set to set. I want to be quality, and have something that's at least interesting or fun, or maybe like serves a purpose. Like I set this problem called Deadly Digits, and it got benchmarked. I didn't benchmark. I don't benchmark any of my stuff. But if people think that I do, I don't. But it got benchmarked, and I set it as like, because I was a couple problems in, and the 2024 set has a lot of underclings, a lot of big pinches, a lot of like open hand drags, and then like the wood holds, the same wood holds as the 2019 set. But I was like, oh, I kind of need like a secondary finger warm up, so to speak. Not that anything on the board is a warm up, but it was like, well, but you know what I'm saying? One of those like, okay, I'm a little warm. I did my warm up off the board. Now I'm on the board. I need that secondary like finger activation. That was like why I did it. So trying to give that to people, who are like, okay, cool. I can now use that, all over the world, which is great.
Yeah. No, I think that's awesome. And I completely agree about constraints. Like, I think it is such an underrated tool. Whether that's for creativity, for training. Like, one of the best summers of training I ever had, I was somewhere that only had a campus board with foot rungs, like, and a barbell, and I had a flash board. And that was it. And so I did a ton of calisthenics. I did a bunch, and this was for sport climbing too. So for like 2.5 months, I just did a ton of foot on campus board work for endurance. I just like put a loop, like a cam strap to my flash board, and just pulled on it as hard as I could. And this was in like 2016. And then I would just like lift weights and do a ton of calisthenics. And then I went out and had an amazing season, did like 2 14As and a 13D all in like 3 weeks or something. And
hell yeah,
it was sick. But what's funny is like, that was the most constrained I've been with training, maybe ever. But it was just like, oh, this is what I have. How do I check the boxes? There was no dilemma over like, wow, I have like 3 different barbells, and also I have like these different dumbbells. I have kettlebells. I have all this thing, and I have 6 different walls. Which board do I use? All this different stuff. Like, I didn't have to worry about that. It was like, well, I have this basically 3 tools. How do I use them to become just a better climber?
Yeah, it's great. I really enjoy it, and I keep a minimal set up in my garage the same way. Yeah, I've been. It's funny because I have got a couple messages recently about like, oh, like you're not as much like on the board or posting as much on the board lately. Like I've still been training a ton. I've mostly been on the tension board too because I just last weekend I put a mini split in my garage, but it's also like the high today is 111.
Dude,
And
I saw
like,
that. It was a new record for Vegas, right?
yeah, since like 2010, like the hottest June day. But so it's like okay, my garage door gets like afternoon sun. It gets absolutely fucking hammered from like noon until sundown, and so it's like I have like a thermometer like everybody else, and it's like 9% humidity and like 105 in my garage right now. So even if I have the mini split running from like now until dark, it will probably be like 79 degrees in there, which is still hot,
Yeah.
like it's just, and that's cooling it 40 degrees, or
Yeah.
whatever. So yeah, it's been interesting. I remember hearing other people on podcasts that have like children say this, like Yves Gravel is like a good example where he's like, man, my training got like so focused once I had a kid. It's like,
Yeah.
and I climbed with another buddy in Vegas here that had a kid recently, and he's like, man, we met up and he's just like so dialed, like boom, 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 boom. And I think like having that time constraint too is really important. Or just, I guess, maximizing your time constraint. I feel like I'm doing that more as I get busier, further along in my career, whatever, where I have this window, whereas maybe 10 years ago I had all day,
Totally.
Yeah. It's just important to use it and to know what you're going to do. Maybe have a rough sketch, a rough idea. I'm sure you deal with a lot of that coaching wise, where people have, busy lives. They can only climb on Saturday, Sunday, maybe.
Yeah. I want them to quit their jobs and put their kids up for adoption. They'd climb a lot harder.
That's it. Yeah, exactly.
But no, I mean, you're absolutely right. It is fascinating to me when people do have more and more life stresses. Either they let things slide or they kind of double down into how am I more effective with my time? And it's cool. It's cool to see, man, because I definitely work with some people who do some very impressive things with very busy lives. And it's inspiring for me too, because I'm like, oh man, like, I don't have kids. And you are getting the job done. This gets me excited.
Yeah, it's cool. There's like some inspiration there as well, which is cool. Did you ever play like Celeste or Hades, Cuphead, any of these games?
Okay, so Celeste and Hades are both like on my list.
That's
and
so good.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on why did you bring up Celeste?
Man, so Celeste, I wrote down, I really like platformers. I'm from like the era of like Mega Man and Super Mario 3 and like all this other stuff. Like I like 2D platformers again, because I think they're like simple and like you can just do so much within those constraints, like
Totally.
all the platforming, all of the precise jumps and things like that. But Celeste does it in a way that's like, well, you like literally climb a mountain. Which is fun, that's like the actual progression of the game, but it also has this really cool woven in story about like mental health and grief and anxiety and depression and things like that, and like you work through it through the levels. So it's got this cool, you talked about like Ishin like doing that one sidestep that adds to his lore of he's this old man, but he's so skilled and has so much experience that he can do that sidestep. He almost knows you're going to overreach. Celeste is the same thing where it really brings you into the inner psyche of the character. and then this just like the mechanics are really tight. Like Hollow Knight, it's got like these really like responsive and tight mechanics. Great level design, great music, colors, very satisfying, just all around satisfying, like difficulty progression. And then Hades, is made by the same people that made Bastion. I think it's like Supergiant Games.
Yep.
Yeah. Did you play Hades, or is that's on your list?
Hades is. I've got more hours on Hades than any other game.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, I mean, talk about like when you first clear Hades, you're like, oh my god, you have this like, we were talking about Genichiro. You're like, man, I must be end game.
Yeah.
And then your first clear of Hades is like, it's like baby's first clear, like you said. It's like, whoa.
Yes.
And then you get to like your 25th clear and you're like, oh my god, this game has so much depth. It's mind blowing how well it's done. Voice acting, art, everything. Like, talk about using the story to really propel what a roguelike is, where you're like redoing the same over and over and over, but it adds to that story. It's incredible.
Yes. It's funny. So with both Celeste and Hades, I have very similar things written. One thing, like everything you said on Celeste, you said perfectly. The one thing that I'll also add, because it is like this idea of overcoming personal struggle, and something I thought they do so well is every time you clear a level, it's like this upward counter of how many times you died. And the way they present it, it feels more like, here's how much you persevered. Like, you gave that 430 tries and you made it through the level. Cool. Let's go to the next harder one. Yeah. Something about just the way they presented that, I loved.
Yeah. Incredible. I think, so we have tons of overlap there. So I have those written down. Cuphead. Did you do Cuphead?
I've played briefly and wow, hard.
Yeah. I mean, that's one that's like, they call it like, well, I don't know if it's fair to call it like a bullet hell game. Some of it kind of like parts of it are, but like, I think it's got like those guys, I think it's like two brothers that made it. And they're just huge animation nerds. Like,
I mean, it shows beautiful.
All the pre-Disney stuff. And there's even YouTube videos like, after like the art and the music are incredible. And then the gameplay is like very good. I don't think the gameplay is as good as like Hades or Celeste, but it's like, it's very good to the point where you're like, wow, everything is really just coming together. I mean, they press the Cuphead soundtrack on vinyl, like they don't do that for every game.
No, that's amazing.
Yeah. And it's just got this really cool, like there's a cool YouTube video after you played a little bit where it shows like all the reference points that they use like direct cartoon references in their boss design and in their level design from old animation, like an homage to old animation, like, like little movements or sways or characters. And it's really cool. It's done with so much care and has a good story. It has like a cool, like fun story where like, hey, they made a deal with the devil and this is the repercussions involve you playing this game and being thrown into it and trying to overcome it. It's awesome.
That's super cool.
Yeah. And then if you played so much Hades, I would play Bastion if you haven't already. That's like, I think it's their first effort, Supergiant's first game, and it's awesome. You can see all the bones. Yeah, if you like look back, you can see all the bones. Like, oh, this is going to become Hades, or this is going to become like all the different weapon combos, and Hades is kind of like the final product, and Bastion's like a first draft, but it's like an incredible first draft.
Sick. That's cool.
Yeah.
To talk on Hades, one thing that I think they do so well, because I went and did like 100%ed it, and then also got the 32 heat trophy.
Holy shit! Okay, wow, yeah, you got hours in that game.
Yes, I did.
That's awesome. Congrats.
It's funny because the 32 heat trophy isn't like the developers. Dude, it felt like it. Like they only make you go to 16 to 100% the game, or like to
I know.
platinum. Yeah. And
I like looked at doing it and I was like, this is a lot for me.
fair. Like,
Yeah.
but something they did so well, and you kind of talked on this, but when you first play, you're just like, oh, I'm going to try and get out of Tartarus, like the first level. And it's just super hard. And then you get through that first boss battle. You're like, okay, cool. There's a new level. And you keep going until eventually you make your first full run through hell. And you're like, amazing, done. I did it. And they're like, actually, you just started. And
Yeah.
from there, like what they do is they keep just slowly cranking up the difficulty, and they incentivize it in such a cool way because they're like, well, okay, now we're going to have this thing called the Pact of Punishment, where you have optional ways to make it harder. And if you do, we'll give you all the equipment you need to level up your weapon so you'll get stronger. You're like, okay, I'll do that. And so you have to use different weapons. You have to keep cranking up the heat. And what's fascinating about it is you kind of just keep your head down the whole time. Like, with the first difficulty, like, okay, this is kind of hard. And then they keep luring you along. Like, had I first started the game and been like, oh, I'm going to try and crank it to 32 heat, I'd be like, yeah, I'll never do that. It would be upsetting.
Yeah.
But, I just like kind of kept playing, it kept going. And then I beat it at 16 heat. And I was like, man, like, I'm actually like kind of good at this game. 32 heat doesn't seem that crazy. And that to me is such a cool thing for them to do. It's done so well to kind of like lure you along and to keep getting better and raising the challenge, to keep you hooked. And this is to circle it back to climbing. It's something that when I look at my years of like both the best growth as a climber, but also just the years I enjoyed the most are the years where I kind of just was focused on the thing I was doing. Like,
Yep.
it was, I remember when I first moved to the South, I climbed like V4, V5. And I remember looking at two V10s, the Womb and Biggie Shorty. And I was like, if that's V10, I'll never climb V10. It's impossible. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to climb all the 4s and 5s, all the 5s and 6s. And I remember when I got to 7, I was like, this is great. I could die happy. V7's the greatest grade. I'm going to climb all of them. And then
especially in the South, V7 is incredible.
Oh, it probably is the best grade, frankly. But I did such a good job of keeping my head down for such a long time. And, it's like, oh, I climb V8. I'm going to do all the V8s, all the cool V7s that were too hard for me then. And it was those times when I wasn't always stuck looking too far ahead. Instead of being like, oh, well, I wish I was climbing V12 because then I could do the shield, and the shield's cooler than what I do now. Like, it was when I started to do that things, max a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I think there's something really to like keeping your head or your field of vision limited, and then really like enjoying doing those 4s and 5s, enjoying doing those runs, the 2, the 3 heat runs, testing them out, getting that satisfaction. There's, you hit those little flow states along the way, and you're not even thinking about 32 heat or V12. You're thinking about just what's in front of you and how cool it feels to be able to like, wow, I got a really good roll on all my boons, and I got like, I got the God roll, and this is awesome. It's so fun. It makes me think of you mentioned Biggie Shorty, and I went to Chattanooga for that board comp last December.
Right. Congratulations, by the way.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Shout out to Sierra on that one too. she held it down, but yeah, I was like just really focused on that, and I don't compete. I'm not like a competitor. A lot of my climbing is pretty isolated or with a few friends, and just orders in my garage and filming it or whatever. But I was so focused on that, and I was talking to like some people afterwards, and they're like, "Oh, hey, what do you think about going to like Stone Fort tomorrow?" And I was like, I literally had not even thought about climbing outside. I was like, okay, like I have to do this thing. I have to fly there, go, the comp, have fun, like say hi to everybody, and just was focused on that. And then went out with Taylor and Maya the next day, got a ride, and ended up doing Biggie Shorty.
Oh, cool.
And it was like so incredible. I didn't have it on my radar at all. You told me about it a long time ago. It's very famous. It's got awesome movement, and it's very like it's got that famous first move, which is really fun. Which is really fun to do, and I think it was great. It's just to your point that like I was having such a fun time, not looking too far forward. I had an awesome time at the comp, dinner with friends and seeing everybody, and it was awesome. And then that next day I had no expectations. It was great, and was able to do that climb, like so that's probably the sorest I've been in like a couple of years that next day, because we board climbed for like 4 hours straight hard, like
Damn.
I think the easiest thing we did was like V9, it's just like rapid, like boom, 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 boom. It was a lot.
That's cool. That's
Yeah.
it kind of reminds me of remember you on other episodes have talked about the story of you doing Mad for You, I think.
Oh yeah. Mad about you.
Mad about you.
I think it's Mad About You. Yeah.
I remember you saying like it was something you were really obsessed with. You're like, oh, I'm going to go to a wedding soon. I need to get this done. And you were just like thrilled about it. And I think it could be really easy for a normal listener to be like, oh, but he like did Black Beauty. He like did all the others. Like, why is a V10 in like on that day? Like, why does that matter? That's just a stepping stone.
Yeah. There's no set, rubric for what's going to matter. Right. I mean, the easiest thing to say is, oh, the thing you spend a ton of time on is going to matter. It's like, but I don't know. I get like all those factors matter, all those factors that like we kind of are so quick to brush off, like, oh, I should do this. Like, I'm strong enough to do this. I've done other stuff at this grade. All these, like, I'm second day on, so it's okay if I don't or whatever. All those factors like matter in approaching a boulder. It might have been a different experience with Mad About You if I didn't have that timeline or that time limit where I was going to Europe for like a couple weeks or whatever. Like I wasn't going to be able to try it. That little fun extra challenge was helpful. It wasn't stressful. It was helpful. It was memorable. Same way that like Biggie Shorty is memorable because it's like if you were to tell me like, hey, you're going to board climb with like some of the strongest climbers in the world. And then for like all day, all evening, and then have a long dinner, late night, get to bed at like, whatever, midnight, and then wake up and I'm like, I'm destroyed. I need like a coffee to even like, I feel like the Tin Man, I'm like rusty.
Yeah.
And then if you were to tell me like, oh, you're going to do like one of the most classic V10s in that field, that I've wanted to try for a long time. I don't get back to the Southeast very often. Like I'd be like, no, you're crazy. There's no way. But just getting on it and doing it, it's like, it's so memorable, so satisfying. So I don't know. I think you have to leave yourself open to those experiences, not put too much expectation on it.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. Like, and that's cool that you were able to have that experience. And that was, I gotta say, from my perspective of having known you for so long and like seen this whole thing happen, it was, I mean, honestly kind of surreal on my end to be like, whoa, Ravioli just like beat these legends in this comp. Like what a cool, like, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I like not to fully fangirl, but like I'm psyched for you all the time, man. I remember, God, I'm trying to remember exactly where I was. I remember seeing your post of you doing Black Beauty. And like for that, the rest of that day, I was like, he did it. He's like, it was like, we did it. Victory. Like, it's been cool seeing like this whole trajectory.
Yeah. Thanks so much, man. I mean, that means a ton. And it's been really cool. I mean, and it's like, likewise, like, the feeling's very mutual because when we met up in Colorado, we got a couple days together and just to hear like, and I watch all your clips and like all your insight and like the way you bring philosophy and how you're thoughtful and just like how you've grown and excelled has been so fucking cool. I'm like, anybody that asks me, I'm like, oh, hey, training stuff, this, that, and the other, I'm happy to talk about a lot of stuff, but I'm like, if you want that type of stuff, you need to go to Nate, like it's just, there's only a few people that are really like thinking very critically, at least that are in my sphere or whatever. And yeah, you're there. Like it's incredible. It's awesome.
I appreciate that, man. That's super nice.
Yeah, for sure. It's cool. I was very much looking forward to this, and we got to climb together. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, it's funny because I feel like I get, maybe like one trip a year, and it's like, I gotta prioritize seeing you, or please come stay when you're in Vegas. Like, yeah, come stay, come hang.
Yeah, I will. It's it'd be a ton of fun, and I have. Now, actually, I'm on this side of the country, so Vegas is not that bad. I would even come down just to board climb.
Let's do it. I love it. Yeah, we just hang out, have some good food, have some good coffee, and listen to some records, and just jump on the board.
Dude, that sounds like a great time.
Dude, there's two things that this conversation made me really want to do, so hopefully it translates to all your listeners. Like right now, dude, I want to go play video games like so bad, and I want to go have a session.
Hell yeah, dude.
You don't know.
This time, 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 power, this time to build power, this time to build power, this time to build power. 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 This time to build. 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 This time to build.